that statistics is a branch of math that involves some steps. The very first step is to ask a question. The second step is to collect the data. In the third step, we try to visualize the data, finding any pattern in our collection. So chapter 2 is about visualizing the data, also analyzing the data. Very well. How do we visualize the data? To visualize your data, you have different methods. First of all, you can take all the data that you have and form a nice table that we call frequency table. This table shows that how many times one value in your collection is repeated. So it shows repetition in your collection. Other than using a frequency table, we can use relative frequency table by adding some new information to our table. So relative frequency table is very similar to our frequency table. It just has a new column with relative information, relative data. And finally, we can use a software and graph using different charts. We can use a pie chart, scatter plot, histogram, and so on. Very well. First, let us talk about frequency table. I'm going to go over one example to show you how to form a frequency table. We are on page 2, 2.1, example. In this example, you have a collection of data. Some numbers are given to you. 128, 200, 110, 100, 65, 126, 180, 230, 170, 150, another 150. You have 132, 200, 150, 140, 90, 120, 112, 340, 130, 90, 105, 80, 340, 85, 230, 170, 270, 200, and 190. As a statistician, you had a question, you identified your population, you took a sample, and these are the information that you have. All these numbers are included in your collection. So how many data do we have? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have 30 numbers in your collection. So our goal is to form a frequency table. Our goal is to form a frequency table. There you go. Let me erase this part of the book so I can form your frequency table here. So first step. In the first step, we're going to find the smallest value, the largest value in the collection. Step 1, find minimum and maximum values in your collection. In this set. Okay, let us look for the minimum value. What would be the minimum value? Is it going to be 80? Let me find. Okay, so it seems like 80 is the minimum value in the collection. So mean is 80. What about your maximum value? Let's look for the maximum value in our collection. Just trying to check to see, okay, we have 340. Do we have any number greater than 340? It seems like 340 is the maximum value in the collection. Okay, after identifying the minimum and maximum, you form something that we call range of the data. Step 2, find the range, which is defined as maximum value in your collection minus the minimum value in your collection. Maximum minus the minimum. So here you have 340 minus 80. 260. Okay, guys, note that we made a mistake here. The minimum value is not 80, it is 65. So the range is 270. So let me just circle this, 65 and 340. Okay. There you go. So this is our range. In step 3, you need to select, you need to pick class numbers. How many classes, as a statistician, it's your job. How many classes do you want to have in your table? Do you want to have 5 classes? Do you want to have 6 classes? Do you want to have 7 classes? Do you want to have 10 classes? Do you want to have 20 classes? How many classes you want to have in your table? Step 3, select the number of classes that you want to have. So if the question says, suppose you have 7 classes, you start by 7. If the question doesn't give you any specific number, it's your job to just select or pick a class number. But note that class number is a number between 5 and 20. This is the rule that we use to pick or select a class number. Any number between 5 and 20 is inclusive. So you can select 5 or 20 or any number in between. Suppose I select 7 classes. So let us have 7 classes. Very well. So I already know that I'm going to have 7 classes. So let's form some part of a table. So this is a table. So since this is a table, you're going to have the first column. Your first column is going to be classes, or we call them bins. Classes or bins. How many classes? You already know that it's going to be 7 classes. You select the 7. Okay, your first class. Second class. Third class. The fourth class. The fifth. The sixth. And this is your last class. Very good. So, smallest number, smallest value in your collection is 65. So your first class starts at 65. Very well. So now you have to think, very well. So it starts at 65. What about the second class? What number should I use here? What about my third class? What's the lower limit for the third class? What about the fourth class? What's the lower limit for the fourth class? So instead of saying that which number to start with, to begin with, we say that what is the lower limit for my next class? How do we calculate that? To find the lower limit for each class, we're going to do a little bit of algebra. In step 4, you take your range and you divide it by the number of classes that you want to have in this question or example. The number of classes. So this is the general formula. This gives you something that you call class width. Your class width. So for this example, our class width is equal to, the range is 275. 275 divided by 7, it's almost 39 point. Okay, let me find 39.29. You can round this up to 40. So the division gives me 39.29. I'm going to round this up to 40. Are you allowed to round it down to 39? That's fine as well. Very well. So what I'm going to do, to find the lower limit for the second class, I'm going to add 40 to 65. 65 plus 40 gives me 105. So my next class starts at 105, or the lower limit for the second class is 105. We're going to continue this process. We're going to add 40 for the class width to lower limit of each of previous classes. So now you have 145. 145 plus 40, 185. 185 plus 40, 225. 225 plus 40, 265. And 265 plus 40 gives you 305. Very well. So my lower limit for my first class is 65, where I'm going to stop. What's the upper limit? The upper limit is 104. So my first class starts at 65 and it stops at 104. How many 65 do I have in my collection? How many 66 do I have in my collection? How many 67 do I have in my collection? How many 68 do I have in my collection? How many 69 do I have in my collection? How many 70s do I have in my collection? How many 71? How many 72? How many 73? So, what is the frequency of numbers in between 65 and 104? What is frequency? So this is the next column that you are learning. Frequency, or the count of numbers between 65 to 104 inclusive. Okay, how many 65 do I have? I have 165. How many 66? Do I have any 66? No. 67, I don't see 67. 68, I don't see any 68. How many 69? Nothing. How many 70s? I don't see any 70s. What about 71? 72, 73. So you have to find all the numbers between 65 and 104. Okay, let's find them. I know 90 is in between 65 and 104. I have 85. Okay, what else is there? Another 80. Excellent. What else I have? I have 90 here. Is that it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What else? Do I have anything else? For the whole thing. Okay, I have 100. So I have 6 numbers. I have 6 numbers between 65 and 104. So the frequency of the first class is 6. There are 6 data values in between 65 and 104 inclusive. Very well, we can continue this process and find all frequencies for the rest of these classes. So my second class, how many numbers are in between 105 and 144? If you count these numbers, you're going to have 9 of them. How many numbers are in between 145 and 184? If you count them, you're going to have 6 numbers. How many numbers are in between 185 and 224? It's going to be 4 numbers. So the frequency of this class is 4. For next class, the frequency is going to be 2. And the 6th class, the frequency is going to be just 1. Just 1 number in between 265 and 304. We're looking at that data here, and you find that numbers. And finally, the last class frequency is going to be 2. Very well. So we have our frequency or count for each of these classes. Next column that you're going to add is called frequency, relative frequency for this table. Very well. In step 5, use a little bit of algebra to find relative frequency for each class. So relative frequency for each class is the division between the frequency of that class divided by the sum of all frequencies. Frequency of each class. So the frequency of the first class is 6. 6 goes on the numerator, divided by the sum of all frequencies. So we're forming the last column, and we call it relative frequency. Very well. So what's the sum of all these frequencies? 6 plus 9, 15. 15 plus 6, 21. 21 plus 4, 25. 27, 28, 30. Where did we see 30? 30 numbers in our collection. So the sum of all frequencies, the total number of values in your collection, 30 numbers must be equal to the sum of all frequencies. So the relative frequency for the first class is 6 divided by 30. Relative frequency for the second class, 9 divided by 30. Relative frequency for the third class, 6 divided by 30. Relative frequency for the fourth class, 4 divided by 30. Relative frequency for the fifth class, 2 over 30. And relative frequency for the sixth class, 1 over 30. And relative frequency for the last class is 2 over 30. You have to do the division. You can represent the numbers in decimal or percentage format. So this is going to be 0.2 or 20%. 9 divided by 30 is going to be 0.3 or 30%. You have 0.2 or 20% again. 4 divided by 30, 0.13 or 13%. 2 divided by 30 is 7%. and 1 over 30 gives you 3%. 0.07 or 7%. Very well. What else we can add to our frequency table or relative frequency table? We can also add something that we call midpoint or middle point of each class. What's that? That is just a representative for each class. So instead of listing lower limit and upper limit of your class, you can find the midpoint for your class, and instead of listing these, you can just write down one representative, which is usually the midpoint. So how do we find the midpoint? In step 6, you can find midpoint. The midpoint of a class is the sum of lower limit, upper limit divided by 2, or the average of your class. So lower limit plus upper limit divided by 2. So, for example, the midpoint for the first class, let me erase these frequencies and add the midpoint here for you. Frequency here, 6, 9, 6, 4, 2, 1, 2. Midpoint. So what you're going to do, you're going to add 65 and 104 and divide it by 2. So the midpoint for the first class is going to be 84.5. For the second class, you're adding 105, 144. You add them together and you divide it by 2. So the midpoint for the second class, 124.5. Okay, as you can see, the difference between these two numbers is 40. So to find the rest of the midpoints, we can just add 40 and continue. It's going to be 164.5, 204.5, 244.5, 284.5, and 324.5. Very well. So what's the point of forming a frequency table or relative frequency table? We're going to use these data and actually see a chart or graph related to this data that we have. So what are we going to do? Let me erase this part of the board so we have enough space. So now we are going to use our frequency table to graph frequency histogram. So how it works? First of all, to graph a histogram, we need a horizontal axis. We have classes listed on horizontal axis. So you start by having a horizontal axis, classes. We have 7 classes. Okay. What about vertical axis? On the vertical axis, you're actually using your frequency, or if you're using relative frequency histogram, on vertical axis, you're going to eventually use relative frequency. So since it's just a frequency histogram, on vertical axis, we're going to use our frequency. So the maximum frequency that we have is 9. So let us scale it at 10. 5. And the rest of the frequencies. 7 classes. The first class starts at 65. So my first class starts at 65. And my last class stops at 344. Very well, 65 to 104. So this is your first class. Your first class, 65, 104. First of all, when you're using a histogram, you cannot have any gaps in between your bars. So gaps are not allowed in a histogram. If you have gaps in between bars, we call it bar chart or bar graph. Since you are forming a histogram, you have to have all bars adjacent to each other. So instead of using lower limit and upper limit, you're just going to focus on your lower limits. 65, 105, next class, 145, next class, 185, next class, 225, next class, 265, and you have 305. So let me just move this. And your last one stops at 344. Okay, so what's the frequency of the first class? It is 6. What's the meaning of that? It means that your first bar goes up and it stops at 6. This is your first class bar. First class. What about the second class? The frequency of the second class is 9. So your second bar stops at 9. So we continue going up and we stop at 9. Second class. Third class, frequency is 6. So my third class and my first class have the same frequency, similar bars. My third class. My fourth class, okay, the frequency is 4, so I'm going to stop at 4. This is my fourth class with frequency 4. My fifth class has frequency 2. Okay. Let's just move this a little bit further up here. This is my fifth class. My sixth class has frequency just 1. There we go.